Welcome to the Wild Side. This is your host, Kight, and that was Cat Power with Metal Heart. And as you know, normally I like to line up the themes of my music with the themes of my show, and unfortunately I couldn't quite find any tracks that specifically mention the animal that I want to discuss today, but because that animal is a cat, I thought that I would go with kind of a general cat theme to the tunes. So all the music today is by Cat Power, and the cat that I specifically want to think about is the cheetah. So I want to start off by thinking about the evolutionary history of cheetahs, and then think about kind of their life history, their behaviors, the habitats in which they live, and some of the challenges that are facing these cats today. So cheetahs are one of the earliest divergences in felid evolution. So they kind of branched off the family tree before the rest of the cats that we know and love today. So things like leopards, mountain lions, tigers, lions, things like that. And you might know, if you've ever seen these animals, even if it's just in a video or in photographs, that they do tend to look quite different. They move very differently. And so there are some real distinctions that are partly related to the fact that they did come off the tree much earlier and kind of evolve in different ways in different habitats to have different sorts of life history behaviors. So the ancestors of these animals were actually in North America, which you might not have guessed given the fact that these are predominantly found in Africa today. And they evolved around 5 million years ago and then migrated into Asia and Africa. And the last common ancestor of all the different types of cheetah populations that were once found around the world, and these were all actually much larger cats than the ones that we know today, those lived about 4 to 5 million years ago, and then little by little those other species died out, and eventually we were just left with the one species that we know today. Now, these were actually one of the most widely distributed land animals that we know of, because they did start off in North America, but then move outwards. So they migrated across land bridges into China, and from there throughout the west of Asia, down into India, across into Europe, and then down into Africa. And the range that they live in today, which again is predominantly in Africa, although there is also a small pocket up in the Middle East, that was settled approximately 20,000 years ago, which actually, in the grand scheme of things, is relatively recently. So this is the time actually in which humans would already have been living in Europe. So, this is kind of, in a sense, kind of modern memory for humans. This is well into the development of humans and the dispersal of humans into Europe. So this is actually kind of a concurrent thing that happened long after humans had already started moving around. It's quite interesting to think of these animals that have a very recent evolutionary history relative to our own. Now, the modern form of the animal is Acinonyx jubatus, if you want the Latin name, and it evolved around 200,000 years ago. Now, about 12,000 years ago, there was an extinction event that wiped out a really large number of cheetahs, and that left only a relatively small number to continue the population, and this is known as a bottleneck, when basically you've only got a relatively small number of genes that are left from the total gene pool to then continue on the population. And bottlenecks are generally not thought to be a very good thing, because it means that you don't have as much genetic variation in the population, which means that if things change in the environment and you would have had a mutation that could have helped you deal with that, suddenly you don't have that capability as much because you don't have as many genes to choose from. Another big problem is that it means that any recessive traits that ordinarily would not have been expressed all that often suddenly become much more common, because you only have a few animals left to breed, and so it's more likely that those recessive genes are going to be expressed in combination with the same other recessive genes that suddenly become more and more common. And so all of a sudden you've got all these animals that have a lot of problems. So this was not a great thing for the cheetahs. And then they were hit again by a second extinction event that happened because of humans. And this is happening both in the Asian and the African areas in which these animals were living at the time. So in Asia, Akbar the Great, who was only one of many people involved in hurting the cheetahs, but he was particularly bad because he took tens of thousands of them out of the wild in order to race them and use them for hunting. Now this is because cheetahs are the most easily tamed of all the big cats, and it actually can happen very quickly. So it didn't take much effort for them to go get these animals out of the wild and tame them so that they could be kept in captivity and raced and used kind of like we might use hounds today. And unfortunately, when they did that, you might think something would happen kind of like what happens with dogs, where with wolves coming into dogs, where they're very good at breeding around us, and so suddenly we have lots of them because they can create puppies, or in the case of cheetahs, they can create cubs and then kind of self-sustain. But that wasn't true of cheetahs. They weren't really breeding in captivity. Out of all of these tens of thousands of animals that were taken, only a couple ever had litters, and so they just kept taking more and more and more from nature. And at the same time, in Africa, we know that the Africans also were kind of quite interested in cheetahs for their own purposes. So the Egyptians saw cheetahs as transporters of the souls of the dead pharaohs, and so they might have killed and mummified some of these animals or kept them in menageries because of this interest. We also know that there are some ethnic groups, so for example, the San people, who ate cheetah meat because they perceived it as giving them speed. Healers also might have used things like cheetah foot bones for fleet-footedness, so they would grind up the bones and consume them, or maybe sprinkle them on things. And also cheetah skins were worn by people to show kind of elegance and power. And so all of these things were practices that helped make humans interested in hunting cheetahs and diminishing their populations. And then on top of this, they have had yet a third extinction event. And this, whether you want to think of it in the past or think of it as ongoing, is kind of up to you, because there are some glimpses of rebounding populations. But certainly it's not a very good situation for the cheetahs at the moment. It's not really looking bright and sunny, so I would say it probably is a contemporary extinction event, and this is tied to the loss and fragmentation of habitat. And really, this kind of started in earnest in 1900, and this is when we knew that there were about 100,000 cheetahs found throughout 44 countries in Africa and Asia. And that's not a huge population, but given that these are big animals that cover lots of space, you might not want to have more animals than that, because actually too much density might not be good for them. So 100,000 we can think of as a fairly healthy population size. But now we only have about 10,000 cheetahs, which is a 90% decline, and they're found in only 23 countries, which obviously is quite a bit fewer than the original 44. That was censused in 1900. So we also know on top of this that viable populations are found in fewer than 50% of these countries, and that means that these animals are in general not doing all that well. They're vulnerable, they're endangered, they're on all of the conservation lists because of this, and so after all of this time, after these hundreds of thousands of years that they have moved across the globe and thrived and done really well, they're now in quite a lot of trouble, not only because of humans, but also because of those earlier bottleneck events as well. So they've really been hammered time and again, and that is why their populations are struggling at the moment. Now, to think about how we can actually help cheetahs, it's really important to think about what is the life of a cheetah like, because whenever you understand these kind of basic biological things, that helps you to think about the areas in which you can really have a hope of altering something. Obviously, you're not going to do very well altering it with the cat itself and trying to convince it to act differently, but to figure out how humans and cats can kind of live side by making decisions based on the biology. So let's start off by thinking about the life cycle of a cheetah. And obviously the first part of the life cycle is birth. So females, once they are pregnant, they gestate for about 93 days or 3 months, and then they give birth in a nice sheltered spot. And they don't have to find dens like we find in a lot of cats that we are more familiar with. The ones that tend to live in Europe, for example, might find a nice hole in the ground or a cave. Well, these guys, obviously out there on the savannah, they're not going to find too many of those things. And so they tend to find bushes where they can just kind of hunker down underneath. There might be a little bit of a depression so they can kind of snuggle in. But it's more or less out there in the open, and they just have to rely on the scrub to keep them safe and sheltered and keep them relatively hidden. Now, litters may include up to 8 cubs, but more usually they max out at about 6. And generally, whenever you see documentaries of cheetahs or whenever you see images of these guys in magazines, you tend to find that there are maybe 3 or 4 cubs. So they don't tend to have lots and lots of them unless they're extremely healthy. And even when they do, they have quite a high rate of dying off. They are easily killed out there in the savannah. It's, they're very helpless. It's a hard life for these little guys, so usually only a couple of them ultimately end up surviving. Now at the time that they're born, they only weigh about 8.5 to 15 ounces, so it's less than a pound. They're completely blind and they're totally helpless. I mean, these guys are like little house cat kittens. You know, they are just as helpless, just as small, and they need just as much help from their mothers. And that's why they end up staying in the nest for 6 to 8 weeks. But they don't stay in the very same nest where they were born, because it would be quite obvious if the female were going back to the same spot over and over again, or as they grew, they might start to grow out of it. They would start leaving scents around. And so what the female does is she'll regularly move them from one spot to the next, maybe every few days, in order to keep them safe and keep them hidden and not give away where she's hiding her babies. Now the mom will continue to care for the babies for about 18 months until they're completely mature enough to go off and hunt for themselves and to fend for themselves. But the really critical period in the maternal care is the first 3 months, and this is when mortality is the highest. And I said life is not easy out there for these guys, and it turns out that only about 1 in 10 cubs survive that first 3 months. So it's definitely a struggle to get them through that period. And part of that is because it's hard for the mom to get enough food to feed all of them, but also because there are a lot of predators out there, a lot of things like hyenas, jackals, lions that would be quite interested in snatching up a little cheetah cub. Now the cubs are in the nest, as I said, until about 6 weeks, but then at that point they are happy to leave the nest and they can follow the mother around as she searches for prey. And one thing that's useful about this is that it means that she doesn't have to keep going back to the nest, which is really important because she is kind of stuck within a 1 to 2 mile radius of the nest when that's where the cubs are, because she can't ever leave them for too long, otherwise it would be dangerous. So once they can leave, she can be a bit more mobile, and also they can sit there and watch her doing what she's doing and start to learn how they can replicate those behaviors themselves. Now the cubs are very playful, and a lot of us, I think, have probably seen footage of wild animals, in particular wild predators like cats, playing around, and it looks really cute, but actually what they're doing is learning how to be aggressive, and they're learning how to catch prey, and they're also learning how to fight off potential rivals that they might encounter later, so members of their own species. And all of that adorable stuff that they do rolling around on the ground is later going to be an actual, real, claws out, fangs out kind of fight on the savannah. So although it looks like fun and games, it's actually quite serious. It allows them to learn these motor skills. It allows them to learn how to overpower another individual, and also how to coordinate themselves and do kind of really complex movements. Another thing that they might do when they're out there and about, when they're young, and that they don't do this when they're older, is use play trees. And play trees are basically trees that are kind of oriented in the right position so that the cubs can use their claws to scramble up them, sit on the limbs, and kind of look out. And older cats won't do this because they can't climb quite as well, and also because the trees tend to not favor their large size and large body weight. And so it's predominantly a thing that's used by cubs. They can also use the trees to leave scat and scent marks to kind of start marking out their territory. And it again allows them to kind of see things a bit more, get an idea of what their world looks like, and also to climb around and develop those motor skills. But like I said, they're going to learn predominantly the hunting techniques from their mom. This is one of the most important things they pick up. And first of all, they have to know where to look. And this seems like quite a silly thing, but cheetahs are constantly scanning the horizon. It's one of those things kind of similar to when you're out there looking out at the ocean, and you're trying to look for a whale maybe, or a ship on the horizon. And after a long time when you've been looking, you start to kind of see visions basically, just because your eyes are so tired, you don't know what you're looking at anymore, and it becomes overwhelming. And it's kind of like that on the savannah, where things can look very similar for miles on end. So the cubs have to be very good at knowing where to look and how to discriminate a potential prey item or a potential rival from all the other stuff that's out there on the savannah. And they have amazing vision, but it takes months and months to develop when they're quite young. So they can learn these appropriate behaviors from their mother even before they can actually see what it is she's looking at. They can watch that she climbs up on a mound and kind of looks in a certain direction when the wind is coming from one place rather than another. So they kind of get these cues so that they know the order in which they should do behaviors, even before they can really do those behaviors in a logical sort of way, an advantageous sort of way. Now once the female kills whatever animal she's interested in, which is usually some sort of a smallish to medium-sized ungulate, she will call the cubs so that they can come investigate the kill. And she'll only start doing this once they are out of the nest, once they're no longer completely reliant on her milk for their nourishment. So she'll call them over so they can kind of play around with this dead animal and get an idea of the sort of thing that they're going to be hunting. Now at that point they're not able to actually break it open themselves because it takes quite a lot of power and strength and again the coordination and the teeth to do it. So she has to get through the skin so that they can then actually feed. But after a while they're going to be able to do this on their own and actually process the animal as well. And basically it's about 2 to 3 months when they're beginning to feed on real meat rather than on milk. So let's think about hunting a little bit in more detail, or learning to hunt. Cheetahs begin participating in real hunts, so not just watching mom, but actually either helping mom out or working together with each other to get the hunt, at about 1 year old. So they've taken quite a lot of time to look around and get an idea of how you do this. And once they do this, it's really fantastic for the mom because it really eases the burden on her, and it helps the young to develop all the skills that they're going to need later on when they are completely on their own. So the components of the hunt, how does the hunt actually proceed? Well, first they have to detect the prey. So they gaze, follow, they're looking where the mom is looking, and then they're identifying whatever prey it is that she's looking at. And that's kind of, that seems silly, but if she's looking off and she's seeing a whole herd of animals, it's important to know that she's looking at the little Thompson's gazelle, which is maybe the size of kind of a deer fawn, rather than a water buck, which is much larger, maybe the size of a cow. So they need to know which of the things out there is a thing that they can actually run after and grab. Then they have to do some stalking, which is something they actually can do instinctively. I think we all know what stalking is, where they're kind of crouching low, they have their ears back, their tail down, they're being quite quiet. Then they'll actually chase the animal once they get close enough. Once they get right up next to that animal, they can swipe a paw out and trip it up and then grab it. And then they'll kill it by suffocating it with a strong bite to the neck. And some of the earliest kills tend to be really easy ones. So they might take a fawn, they might take something particularly small, they might take something that's obviously quite ill. So it's things that they aren't going to require a whole lot of skill for them to get, but little by little it'll become trickier and they'll learn what they need in order to get those harder, faster, springier sorts of animals that only the more experienced hunters can get. So after a while, the cheetahs reach adolescence, and even when they're in this period, when they can fend for themselves, they will still spend several more months with their mother, because this again is a time for them to kind of perfect the skills they've learned, and also continue to take advantage of the fact that whenever they're with her, she's looking out for them and she'll help protect them and watch for predators and help them out. So this allows them a bit more time to kind of really become full-blown independent adults. But once they reach adulthood, they do have to start thinking about moving on. So the females will do this in a different way from what the males will do. So dominant males that are living in the same areas where these young cubs are growing up, they will eventually come around and chase off the males as they grow up into maturity themselves. The dominant males in the area, they don't want these potential rivals living around them, and so they will drive them away. Now, unlike lions, they won't kill them, and that's because these females will kind of roam through the different territories of multiple different of multiple different males, and she might mate with multiple of them. And so these guys don't know if those are their young or not. So it's better to just chase them away rather than risk killing potentially their own children. So they'll chase off the brothers, but they'll let the females stay. And the females are reproductively active at about 16 months of age. And clearly it's going to be a useful thing for territorial males to allow the females to be around, because that is potential partners that they could have offspring with later on. So the siblings will disperse and roam for a couple of years before they ultimately will find and maintain their own territories. And if you've just got a single male, he'll go off on his own. But if he's got some brothers, they'll stick together in a little coalition. And they might wander hundreds of miles before they're finally able to find a suitable place, because there are lots of dominant males already. They're going to keep getting chased out of one place after another, and they finally have to find a place where either they can live kind of under the radar, or there's completely open area, there's no territorial male at all, and they can just slot themselves in. And they might actually break up at that point and no longer be a coalition, or they might stick together, these male siblings, for the rest of their lives, because they can't always watch each other's backs, and they can also help each other with the mating game, basically, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But it's not necessarily a bad thing to have your brothers with you, because you do all have the same genes. So as long as you can maintain that territory together and entertain the passing females, then actually it's going to be almost as useful to you that your brother has offspring than as you have offspring. So it's quite a good thing to have some teamwork there in terms of reproduction. And of course, if you've got your brothers there to help you with hunting, that's going to be really useful. Two of you is probably better than one to bring down a bigger prey item. Three of you is even better than that, so why not just stick together? And also, the more eyes you have, the more likely you're going to be able to spot predators and also competitors. So there are lots of advantages to sticking together as brothers. Now, life is actually quite hard for an adult male cheetah. Because of all the competition and other environmental factors, so things like poaching, loss of habitat, things that humans have done. And as a result of all of this, their lifespan is only about 8 years, even though they can live to twice that when they're in captivity. Now, as I said, the females can breed at about 16 months, but they usually don't do so until they're about 30 months old, or about 2.5 years. Now, in some parts of the range, the females are going to only mate with a single male within a coalition. But in other parts of the range, they can mate with multiple males and have mixed litters. And when I'm talking about the range here, I'm talking about all cheetahs everywhere. So in certain pockets of the cheetah population, you have this kind of, I'm only going to mate with maybe the dominant male sort of preference. But elsewhere, you find that they're kind of different preferences. And this may have to do with the fact that there are some subpopulations within the whole cheetah range. It might also just be that there's some kind of a local environmental thing that happened. That was just what the cheetahs preferred that settled there, and then they passed on that preference to their offspring. It's hard to say. But certainly there is this amount of variation, and that's why, as I said, it can be useful for these males to stick together because they don't know which of these areas they're going to settle in necessarily, and ultimately, as long as a female is mating with someone in your family, that's pretty good for you because you're sharing genes with them and your genes are moving on to the next generation. And that's ultimately what it's all about. Now, as you have kind of probably gleaned from this, cheetahs are actually kind of social. You've got brothers living together, you've got the cubs growing up together, you've got females roaming around and encountering males. And so there is actually quite a lot of communication that goes on. There are quite a lot of social interactions. And actually, cheetahs are considered to be one of the most social of all of the cats, other than lions, which of course we know do live in prides that do have quite a lot of interaction between animals. Although I should also mention that I did talk about tigers a couple months ago on the show, and I did say that researchers are finding out that tigers are actually much more social than they used to think. So maybe there are more wild cats that have these sorts of behaviors and we just don't realize it. But certainly, for the moment at least, cheetahs do seem to be a bit on the extreme end of the spectrum over near lions. So for example, large groups of them have been observed together at water holes where you might have potentially a bunch of female relatives that all kind of group up together because the females aren't going to be nearly as competitive with each other. They can all kind of help each other, maybe keep an eye out on the young, keep an eye out for potential predators. And the young aren't going to be competitive at that age, so there's no real reason why they should fight amongst themselves, and they might as well just hang out in the same place. Also, there's a lot of evidence that there is kind of a matriarchal society. As I said, the females don't disperse when the males do as they kind of reach adolescence. So it might be that they all have this loyalty to their natal territory when they're breeding, and if you are going to stick all in the same place, you're going to end up encountering each other, your sisters, your cousins, so you might as well get along. And we also know that females are roaming around a lot, going from one male's place to another and kind of seeing where is the best habitat, where are the best males. And so again, there are lots of interactions that they're going to have during that time. And there's a lot of evidence that cheetahs actually remember each other specifically, and they'll greet familiar individuals in a way that indicates that they know that they have these ties. So they have certain vocalizations, they'll sniff each other, they'll lick each other, they'll rub each other's cheeks, very much like your house cats might do when they wander into the living room together at the same time. So they show a lot of that kind of stereotypical behavior that shows that we see in animals that are kind of used to each other and are recognizing each other. Now, interestingly, cheetahs are the only big cats that purr, but they don't roar. And purring is especially common during grooming. So, for example, between a mother and her cubs, or between the different cubs themselves in a litter. The mother makes bird-like chirp sounds when she's calling the babies to a kill. And there's also another sound for short-range communication, and it sounds kind of like a dog-like bark. And other vocalizations include kind of what's referred to as a bubble sound. They also hiss and they growl. And whenever they're facing large prey that are kind of standing their ground and making the cheetahs a bit nervous, they'll stamp their feet while also growling and hissing and spitting, trying to scare off these big things. So there are all sorts of things that these animals do that are maybe a bit different than the vocalizations that we think of in the other big cats that we're more familiar with. So already these guys have a lot more personality than you might have thought if you've ever seen them in the wild, because often they're just kind of lounging there under a tree in the shade, kind of resting up. And also I think we tend to not know as much about cheetahs as we do about lions and tigers, and so we don't realize that they do have all these little facets to their personalities. So that's all I'm going to say for now about kind of the life cycle of the cheetah. I'm going to have a bit of a music break and then think about some of the specific adaptations that cheetahs have to make their lives easier. Welcome back to the Wild Side. This is your host, Caitlin Kight, and that was Cat Power with Lord Help the Poor and Needy. And on today's show, we are talking about cheetahs, and now I want to think about some of the specific adaptations that the cheetah has that really make it stand out from other animals and really help it have the particular lifestyle that it has. So first of all, right before the break, I was talking about cheetah hunting and how the young learn to hunt over the first couple years of their lives. And they do have quite a lot of adaptations that make cheetahs particularly good at hunting. And a lot of people actually say that cheetahs are one of the best hunters on the savannah. And the problem is that often when they bring down their kill, it's then stolen by other animals. But they do actually have a really high success rate of actually capturing what it is they're going after. So why is this? Well, first of all, cheetahs hunt early in the morning and also early in the evening. And obviously these are kind of nice, cool times when it's not going to be so hard for them to exert all of the energy that they have to exert. And as I'll talk a little bit about later, temperature is a really important issue. So this is an energetically good time for them to go out and do that sort of stuff. They target a variety of animals, mostly ungulates, so kind of the little gazelles in particular are really good size, things like dik-diks and duikers and stuff like that. And those animals will have a variety of sizes, but they tend to average about 60 pounds, but be anywhere from 20, so that would be a fawn, up to 123, so maybe a full-grown impala or something like that. Now, cheetahs have really amazing eyesight, and if you've ever seen a picture of a cheetah or seen one in the wild, you know that they do have really large amber eyes that are quite striking, and they take up quite a lot of space on the face. And these eyes are really powerful. They're so good that basically cheetahs can see what humans can see when we're using really good binoculars. So just their regular vision is, 2, 3, 4, 5 times as good as ours. They have these black straps that go between their eyes, kind of down around their mouths and to their chins, and those are called malar stripes. And these act to reduce glare from sunlight, so kind of like the black that we see in baseball players paint, or also some American football players will do this as well. And also, in addition to getting rid of the glare, they also help to keep the vision of the animals focused on their prey, in the same way that crosshairs in a scope will help you kind of center and keep that thing right in your line of sight. Now, they're always on the lookout for other animals, both predator and prey, and so they tend to always continually be gazing off into the distance, looking around them, evaluating the environment, and keeping track of what's going on. Now once a potential prey is found, the cheetahs will begin stalking. And what they're really hoping to do is get within 10 to 30 yards of the prey, because they have to run in order to capture the prey, and they want to minimize the distance that they're running because it is extremely energetically costly. And the more they have to run, the more likely that the other animal is going to find a way to get away from them. So at a maximum, they'll not exceed 80 yards distance between them. If they get much farther away from that and then start their run, it's pretty highly likely that the other animal is going to get away. They'd have to be really desperate to do a run at longer than 80 yards. So what they're doing when they're stalking is staying low and slow in the grass. They're staying downwind of their prey. Every now and then they might use a little mound in order to hide behind it or to get on top of it and see something a bit better. And basically they're also the whole time using the camouflage of their fur to stay hidden in the grass. And when we see them, it seems quite obvious that they've got all these stripes and spots everywhere. But once they sink down into the grass, which has kind of variegated golden and darker spots, they actually do hide really well. And it's amazing how quickly they just kind of slink out of sight. And it's as though they were never there, even though they're just several feet away from you. Now their speed and their agility are counteracted by their lack of endurance and also the fact that they're generally quite timid. So as I said, these guys are amazing at getting their prey, but then often it's taken off of them by other animals. The chase requires quite a lot of energy, as I keep alluding to, so it only lasts about 20 seconds max, and no longer than 60 seconds, again, when they're kind of at their most desperate and needing to chase for the absolute longest amount of time they can sustain. And one of the reasons they have to limit the amount of time they're actually running after prey is that running raises the cheetah's body temperature to a potentially dangerous level. So they're normally at about 101 degrees Fahrenheit, but when they start running really fast, it can quickly elevate to 105 degrees. And that's a big difference, actually, 4 degrees, and it can actually become quite devastating to the body if they overheat. So they have to be quite careful about how long they are doing this sort of behavior, how intense it is, and then what they do afterwards, because they need to kind of quickly retreat to the shade and rest up, maybe for 30 minutes or more, in order to calm back down and cool back down. And one of the things that they've developed in order to help reduce overheating is an enlarged nasal cavity, enlarged lungs, a strong heart, and really strong arteries. And this helps ensure that they're getting maximum air into their system to kind of cool down what's happening and also to carry back out the heat as they're exhaling, and also to put up with the incredible pumping of the heart and the gasping of the breath. Now, one of the kind of interesting things about this is that the enlarged nasal passages might be one of the reasons why cheetahs have markedly smaller canine teeth than are seen in the other felids. So because they have these gigantic nasal passages, that kind of encroaches on the space where they would have had the roots of their canines, and those really massive canines then that could grow because of really strong roots. So because they have less space, they have smaller roots and then potentially smaller teeth as well. Now, of course, one of the things that we know most about cheetahs is that they're amazing runners. We know that they can accelerate from 0 to 45 miles per hour in just a couple of seconds, and their hunts usually are happening below top speed, so they look like they're going quite fast, but that's actually, maybe 75 or 80%. And then in the last little bit, when they really need to make that final capture, they suddenly put on another burst, and that's an amazing thing that they can do, is go really fast, but then even go faster after that. And one of the reasons they have this kind of two-part structure to their hunt is that the prey will kind of dodge around while it's running, so it might kind of dodge left and then dodge right. And so the cheetahs are going at a lower speed during that, and then once they know that the dodging has kind of stopped and the animal's just running, that's when they increase their pace and get it when it's kind of on its one steady trajectory there towards the end. Now, the chase, in general, will only cover a few hundred yards, and prey are usually caught within about 200 yards of where the chase starts. And if there are too many darts and dodges during that chase, the cheetahs will abandon it. So if there's more than kind of 3 to 4 movements from one side to the next, the cats are going to give up because it's just not energetically efficient for them to keep hunting and keep burning all those calories and then potentially not get the calories in the end that they need from the meat of the hunt. In order to run really well, they have lots of physiological adaptations and morphological adaptations. So as I kind of mentioned at the very beginning, they do have a small head that's quite aerodynamic. They have a very lean body with long legs. On top of this, they have a flexible backbone, and they have shoulder blades that are unattached, so they can have quite a lot of movement, kind of a rolling gait as they're running, and that also allows for twisting from side to side. And they also have a girdle that functions in a similar way. So this allows them to be incredibly flexible and bendy and to make those really high-speed adjustments in direction as they're running. They have a very long tail, so probably the longest tail of any of the cats that I can think of. And this acts as a counterbalance and also a stabilizer. And if you look at pictures of them running, or if you look at video of them running, you'll find that often they're kind of leaning to one side as they turn, and then the tail is sticking straight out to the other side, and it's quite obviously balancing them out as they make that turn. And this helps to ensure that as it's kind of, as the cats are doing those crazy maneuvers, they're not going to roll over, they're not going to spin out when they're trying to chase these other animals around in all sorts of crazy pathways. They can run up to 70 miles per hour, which is that makes them the fastest land animal, and also turn up to 180 degrees. So they are really amazing acrobats in the air. And one of the things that helps them do this as well is the fact that they have semi-non-retractable claws. And they're the only cat with short, blunt claws that don't have skin sheaths. So when you're out on the savannah, if you're lucky enough to go there, you can identify cheetah paw prints because they are, of course, of a certain size, but they're the ones that do actually have, they're a clear cat footprint, but they also have little claw marks, whereas if you were to look at your house cat's footprint, you would just see the little pads and not see the claws on the end because they are retracting. And obviously these are providing traction, kind of like cleats do on a runner. The paws also are less rounded and the pads are more pointed, so these also kind of act like secondary cleats in a way, and they have all these ridges on them, and that potentially helps the animals with braking and anti-skidding as, again, they're making these big turns, and also just to kind of grip the ground and propel them forward as they're running. Now, I mentioned earlier that when they kill an animal, they tend to go for a chokehold on the neck, and this is called a throat bite. And basically, they're just strangulating the animal after they've caught it. So they'll just hold on to it until it can no longer breathe. They're not ripping it apart like a hyena might, for example. A kill can last them for 2 to 5 days, although the cats prefer to hunt daily if they're given the chance. So this is one of the reasons why, even though they do have some of their kills stolen from them, it's all right, because they can last a few days on the kills that they do manage to keep. And this is also true of hydration. So they get a lot of hydration from the blood of a kill, which means that they don't need to have water any more than once every several days, which again is quite useful when you're living on the savannah where there's not a whole lot of water during certain times of the year. Now I keep referring to the fact that they get their prey stolen all the time. So out of 10 hunts, they generally are successful one time, and that's actually quite a high rate for a cat that's out hunting in the wild. So they have a 10% success rate. But then after that, they only get to keep about 50% of the things that they actually bring down. And that's because they're stolen by other animals like hyenas or lions that are bigger and more aggressive and tend to just chase the cheetahs off, because the cheetahs are made not to fight, they're made to run. And so basically, whenever these other bigger, more muscular and aggressive animals show up, the cheetahs have no option other than to go away. Otherwise, they're going to be attacked and probably killed, if not harmed, really badly. So they will kind of put up a bit of a fight at first. If it's just maybe one animal, they'll kind of do a little threat display. But if that doesn't work, or if other animals then show up, they will just take off. And it's even things like vultures that will show up and scare them off, because vultures can be kind of violent, and they are quite large, and so it doesn't really take much to scare off a poor little cheetah from all that hard-working meat that it has won. Now they do often fight with each other, where obviously it's a bit more of an even contest, and when they do that, amusingly, they will slap each other's heads, they'll try to bite each other's legs, and if it's really serious, if they're having a territorial dispute, then they might go in for a strangulation hold like the one that they use on their prey. Welcome back to the Wild Side. This is your host, Kight, and that was Cat Power with Crossbone Style. And today on the show I am talking about cheetahs, and in the last few minutes that I have with you, I'd like to think about cheetah conservation. Now, I mentioned at the top of the show that cheetahs are considered to be vulnerable and/or endangered, depending on what list you're looking at. And that's because there are only about 10,000 individuals left, and about 90% of these live outside of protected areas. So they're not living in land that is covered by some sort of conservation law or another. Now, there are lots of things that conservation requires, and cheetahs have many of these components. People are trying to find ways to help cheetahs. So, for example, conservation requires research. And cheetahs have been studied in depth since the early 1980s, and they are in fact one of the better known cat species. And particularly important are studies that look at health, because cheetahs tend to be susceptible to disease. And also studies that look at habitat use, because one of the biggest problems is that they're losing their habitat is fragmented, and they're encountering lots of people. And we need to find creative ways for cheetahs and humans to kind of coexist in the same areas. Another really important part of conservation is counting numbers. So we need to know how many animals are out there. Are the numbers declining or are they going up? And that allows you to get an idea of what are the appropriate decisions that you need to make as a conservationist or as a manager. And so you need to use a combination of methods to find things like cheetahs, because they can be quite elusive, they can be very wide-ranging, and they can live in very low densities. And so you have to be kind of creative in terms of how you are finding them and keeping track of them. So sometimes they use radio collars, other times they take scat samples, because it's going to be more common for you to find scat that they left behind than to find the animals themselves. You might even be able to take hairs from traps that are left out, for that they might rub up against things, and you can get their hairs and do DNA sampling that way. Also important is anti-poaching patrols, because we know that these animals live in places where they are frequently killed or where their prey are killed, which means that they then have nothing to eat. So using humans and also dogs, and humans working with dogs to patrol large areas and keep the cheetahs and their habitat safe is quite an important thing. Often when there are poaching events, or when something else tends to happen that's just negative on the habitat, you do end up with orphans. And so another big part of cheetah conservation is to raise the orphans. Now, always the option is going to be there to put these things back out in the wild, and wherever possible, conservationists do try to do that. But often, if you're raising them from a very young age, they do become quite tame, and so you can't put them out there to live on their own, because they have become too habituated, or they might not even pick up the skills that they need. So the really young ones might end up being kept as educational ambassadors as they grow up. But the ones that are maybe a bit more old, a bit more independent before they're brought in, those can potentially be kept in another type of enclosure, treated a bit differently, so that they can then be released back out into the wild and hopefully go on to reproduce and help sustain the population. One of the things that a lot of cheetah conservationists are interested in is linking zoos and wild populations. A lot of these animals are living in zoos, and so you can use those areas as places to increase awareness of these animals and interest in these animals, and also to help preserve genetic diversity and even aid in captive breeding. So you can take samples from those animals and create embryos that then can be implanted in wild animals, or even take the cubs from the zoos and mix them in with ones that are going to be released out into the wild, and they can hopefully teach each other how to hunt. And using a mixture of these tactics, you can potentially regrow the wild populations to what they once were. There are, of course, also efforts to stop illegal trade. Now, things aren't quite as bad for cheetahs as they are for other animals, things like rhinos, for example, which I've talked about before on the show. But life certainly isn't great, because you are still a game animal. A lot of people would love to come in and hunt a cheetah, or to have a cheetah pelt for whatever reason. So having laws in place to try to stop illegal activity associated with both live and dead cheetahs are quite important. And then also provisioning alternative sources of income to the people who would potentially want to poach these animals to begin with, or to the people who would want to change the habitat, or who come into the most conflict with cheetahs as they live. So, for example, the pastoralists that have livestock that the cheetahs might hunt. So these sorts of things involve creating conservancies where people donate their land, usually for the purpose of ecotourism, so they can make money from visitors rather than making money from livestock or from farming. using guard dogs to protect livestock in areas, coming up with alternative sources of charcoal. So one of the biggest reasons that cheetahs are losing their habitat is that people are going out and burning down all of the trees, all of the scrub, in order to get charcoal. And then there's no place left for the animals to graze, and so the cheetahs have no food. There's no place left for them to nest and kind of burrow underneath when they want to have their really young and dependent cubs. And so if you can give them another way to get charcoal, they'll leave the trees alone, and then the rest of the habitat will be nice and healthy and useful for the cheetahs. There are also some more creative things like alternative use of livestock. So for example, rather than having a huge herd of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of goats, you have a smaller herd that you're not slaughtering for meat, but potentially just maintaining for a creamery, for example. And a lot of Africans wouldn't normally have a big emphasis on dairy because obviously dairy goes off quite quickly, but there is a population there that's going to be interested in cheese or in milk or whatever. So if you can cultivate an alternative source of income where people are interested in those kind of artisan products, then again these people will have a different way of life that doesn't conflict as much with the cheetahs, and it will be a much happier ending, hopefully. And one of the final techniques that's been used to help with cheetahs is to create conservation clubs, where you've got people from a young age coming together, learning about conservation, doing conservation, contributing to conservation efforts, and learning, growing up with the idea that cheetahs are an animal that you want to have around, that you can live closely with in a peaceful way, and that you don't need to chase off or to kill for some reason or another. So hopefully all of these things together, and in particular, finding ways to keep the habitat safe and to make it useful for both humans and cheetahs simultaneously, hopefully all of that will begin to help the cheetah populations rebound over time and become a bit closer to what they used to be. They might not ever get back up to 100,000, but hopefully we can improve it from only 10,000 individuals. And in particular, put more of them into spaces that are protected and help more of them to reproduce more successfully. So that's the optimistic end of today's show, and I will leave you in the hands yet again of Cat Power singing King Rides By, and I'll talk to you next week.